I'm a 28-year-old man, and for most of my life, I've tried to be the perfect son. I worked hard, never asked for much, and stayed out of trouble. My parents always told me they were proud of me. Well, at least they did, until my sister came into the picture. She's 26, and to be honest, she's been a mess for as long as I can remember. Reckless spending, bad decisions, and a general belief that she was entitled to everything in life. Growing up, it felt like our family's focus was always on her drama. But I never imagined just how far they would go to enable her behavior. This story begins around 2 years ago, right after I found out that my trust fund, something my grandfather had set up for me when I was a child, had been completely drained. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to secure my future and give me the chance to buy a house or start a business. When I confronted my parents, I wasn't ready for their response. My father and mother sat me down at the kitchen table with those blank expressions I had learned to resent. "It's complicated," my father began. "What's complicated about it? Where's the money?" I asked, getting straight to the point. My mother sighed. "Your sister was in trouble. She had debts, serious debts, and well, we had to help her. Family comes first." I stared at them, trying to understand what I was hearing. They had taken something meant to secure my future and handed it over to my sister, who couldn't even keep a job for 3 months without problems. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. "She's your sister," my mother said sharply, her tone changing. "We couldn't just let her end up in jail or worse." "You'll recover," my father added. "You're smart, hardworking. She's not as lucky." It felt like a slap in the face. I left without saying another word, but that night, I decided I wasn't going to let this slide. The first thing I did was contact the lawyer managing the trust. After explaining everything, he confirmed my suspicions. My parents had no legal right to touch the money. The trust was set up explicitly for me, with clear rules that it couldn't be used for anyone else. The lawyer went over my options, and while suing my own parents wasn't something I wanted to do, I didn't see another choice. The following weeks were a blur of emotions. When I served my parents with the legal papers, their reaction was exactly what I expected. "How could you do this to us?" my mother yelled over the phone. "We're your parents. We did what we had to do to keep this family together. You didn't keep anything together." I shot back. "You tore it apart." News spread fast, and soon I was being painted as the ungrateful son who dared to sue his parents. My aunts and uncles called, begging me to drop the case. Others scolded me for airing family secrets. The only person who stayed silent was my sister. That silence ended 2 weeks later, when she showed up at my apartment. "You're seriously suing Mom and Dad over some stupid money," she said as soon as I opened the door. "It's not stupid money," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "It's my future." She rolled her eyes and pushed past me into the apartment. "You're so dramatic. Do you even know what kind of position I was in? Do you know what it's like to have people threatening you? Maybe you should have thought about that before maxing out 10 credit cards," I snapped. She turned to face me, arms crossed. "You've always been selfish, you know that? You have everything handed to you, and now you can't even help your own family." I laughed bitterly. "You think this is about not helping? You stole from me, and now you're playing the victim." Her face twisted in anger. "You're going to regret this. Mom and Dad are going to lose everything because of you, and it'll be your fault." With that, she stormed out. The lawsuit moved forward, though it wasn't easy. My lawyer made it clear that this would take time, but I was determined. During discovery, we uncovered the full extent of what had happened. My parents hadn't just drained the trust fund. They'd also taken out a second mortgage on their house and emptied their own retirement accounts to help my sister pay off her debts. Over $300,000 had been spent on everything from overdue credit cards to personal loans. And here's the kicker. Part of that money hadn't even gone to paying off debts. My sister had spent a significant amount on vacations, designer clothes, and even a down payment on a car. I was furious. I confronted my parents once more, hoping they would finally acknowledge that what they'd done was wrong. But instead, they stood their ground. "We were trying to protect the family," my father said, sitting rigidly in the living room. "Protect the family?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You protected her at the expense of everyone else. You didn't even ask me. You wouldn't have understood," my mother retorted. "You've always been focused on your own life. You have no idea what it's like to worry about someone who can't take care of themselves. That's not my responsibility." I shouted, "She's 26, not a child. And you let her walk all over you and me." My father stood up, his face flushed with anger. "You're tearing this family apart. Do you even care about what this lawsuit will do to us?" I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "I'm not the one who tore this family apart. You did that when you chose her over me." The depositions were grueling. My parents tried to argue that their actions had been necessary, but the terms of the trust were clear. They had no legal right to touch the money. My sister was called to testify, and her sense of entitlement was on full display. "This whole thing is ridiculous," she said, lounging in her chair as if the courtroom was her personal stage. "I didn't steal anything. Mom and Dad gave me the money because they knew I needed it. Isn't that what family is for?" The opposing lawyer pressed her. "Did you use any of the funds for non-essential purposes, vacations, luxury items, or personal expenses?" She hesitated, then smirked. "I mean, yeah, but it's not like I blew it all on stupid stuff. Everyone needs a break sometimes." It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. She had no clue or didn't care how terrible she looked. By the time she finished, even my lawyer was shocked by her arrogance. Around 6 months into the case, my parents realized they were in serious trouble. The terms of the trust were ironclad, and they were facing the possibility of having to repay the entire amount, plus legal fees. They tried to negotiate, offering a partial repayment plan, but I refused. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about accountability. Then came the dirty tricks. My parents started spreading lies about me to the extended family. Suddenly, I was a greedy son who didn't care about his struggling sister. At family gatherings, I was openly ostracized. One of my cousins even accused me of being heartless for suing my own parents. But the worst part was when my sister tried to sabotage me directly. One morning, I received an email from my employer, a major corporation, saying they received an anonymous tip alleging I'd been embezzling funds. It was absurd and easily disproven, but the stress of having to defend myself at work was overwhelming. I knew it was her. The timing was just too convenient. I confronted her directly this time, showing up unannounced at her apartment. "You've sunk to a new low," I said as soon as she opened the door. "What are you talking about?" she asked, feigning innocence. "You tried to get me fired," I said. "You really thought that would work?" Her smug expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "You can't prove anything." I stepped closer, my voice cold. "Maybe not, but the court doesn't look kindly on people who retaliate against plaintiffs. Keep this up, and you'll dig yourself into an even deeper hole." For the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. She slammed the door in my face, but the damage had been done. I called her bluff. The trial was the climax of it all. My parents broke down in court, pleading with the judge for leniency. They talked about how they'd only wanted to protect their daughter, how they never meant to hurt me. My sister predictably painted herself as a victim, claiming she'd been under immense pressure and had no other choice. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. This isn't about punishing my parents. It's about holding them accountable. They made a choice to take what wasn't theirs and betray my trust. If there are no consequences, what's to stop them from doing it again? The judge ultimately ruled in my favor. My parents were ordered to repay the full amount of the trust, plus interest and legal fees. Since they didn't have the money, they were forced to sell their house to cover the debt. My sister was left with nothing, and her credit was in shambles. After the judgment, my parents were devastated. They had to move into a small rental property, far from the suburban comfort they were used to. My father retired early due to stress, and my mother became distant, refusing to speak to me unless absolutely necessary. My sister, however, took the loss badly. She tried to guilt me into giving her money, claiming she was practically homeless and that it was all my fault. "Are you seriously just going to leave me like this?" she asked during one of her uninvited visits to my apartment. "Yes," I replied firmly. "I've done more than enough for you by not pressing criminal charges. Consider yourself lucky." Her face turned red with rage. "You're disgusting. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? One day, you'll realize how wrong you are." I didn't respond. I'd wasted enough energy on her. As satisfying as it was to see justice served, there was no real victory here. My relationship with my parents was permanently fractured. They blamed me for everything, refusing to acknowledge that their own actions had led to this. The extended family remained divided, with some quietly supporting me while others continued to vilify me. Over time, I found peace in knowing I'd stood up for myself. I used the remaining trust money to start a small business, something I'd dreamed of for years. It's been thriving, and I built a life for myself that doesn't revolve around the chaos of my family. Still, the entire ordeal gave me a clearer perspective on entitlement and the lengths people will go to justify their actions. My sister's manipulations, my parents' enabling, they all stem from their belief that I would always forgive, that I would always put them first. They were wrong. For anyone reading this, let my story serve as a reminder. Don't let people guilt you into sacrificing your future for their mistakes. Stand your ground, no matter how uncomfortable it gets. Trust me, it's worth it in the end.